Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Book Summary Podcast. You know those hurts that just linger? Maybe a betrayal, a broken promise, something that changed your life forever. And forgetting feels impossible.
It's tough, right?
So tough. Well, today we're diving deep into Lisa TerKeurst's Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And stick around, because it's not about minimizing your pain or pretending everything's okay.
Definitely not.
It's about finding freedom and healing, even when those memories, those tough memories remain.
Exactly. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future deep dives. Now, one of the things that really struck me right away in the book was TerKeurst's distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So easy to kind of lump those together. But she's very intentional about separating them.
Absolutely. Forgiveness, as she defines it, it's internal. It's a process you go through for your healing.
Not about the other person.
Not dependent on them, no. Not their actions, not even an apology.
That's a big one.
Reconciliation, though, that's different. It's about rebuilding that relationship, and honestly, that might not always be possible.
Right.
Or even safe, especially, if there's been abuse.
Yeah. Thinking about it that way, like separating those two things, it really takes the pressure off, I think. Because so often we get stuck because we feel like, oh, if I forgive, then I have to let them back in, or I have to act like everything's fine.
This kind of didn't happen?
Yeah. But she's very clear. Forgiveness is about releasing that bitterness, the resentment that's weighing you down, not condoning what they did. And she uses a really interesting story from the Bible, Cain and Abel, to illustrate this.
Such a powerful story. If you remember Cain, he murders his brother Abel out of jealousy.
Jealousy, yeah.
But even before that happens, God actually goes to Cain. He sees that anger, the resentment building up inside.
Like God's got this front row seat to Cain's thoughts. You know?
He does. And he warns him. He's like, Cain, this isn't good.
Yeah.
This is dangerous. He urges him to choose a different path.
So it's not just about sibling rivalry, right? It's about what happens when we let that anger fester. And it's interesting, God even describes sin as this thing lurking at the door, wanting to control us.
Right, waiting to pounce.
Almost like he's saying, hey, I see what's going on inside you, and this isn't going to end well if you don't do something about it.
And that choice, that's where forgiveness comes in, mastering those emotions before they consume you.
Yeah. And even if you're not coming at this from a faith perspective, that idea of mastering your emotions, I mean, that's universal, right? We all know what it's like to hold on to anger and how destructive that can be.
Absolutely. Unforgiveness can cause way more harm than the original offense.
Ugh, it's so true. And if you're finding this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
Yes, please do. It really helps us out. Now, speaking of that damage unforgiveness can cause, TerKeurst uses this really powerful image. She calls it the gray table.
Okay, I love this.
It's not a literal table, of course.
Right.
It's more like a metaphor for the safe space, the space where we can just be real about how messy our emotions are.
So often we feel like we have to have it all together. You know, put on that brave face.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah, and pretend like we're over it. But the gray table, it's like permission to not be okay.
Exactly. Acknowledge the hurt, the anger, the confusion.
All of it. No judgment.
And what's really helpful is she actually lists common reasons why people resist forgiving.
Okay, like what?
Well, fear of being hurt again, wanting to hold on to that sense of control, feeling like your pain isn't being acknowledged.
Yeah, I felt that.
It's like she's saying, hey, it's okay to struggle with this. These are valid feelings.
And just acknowledging those reasons can be so validating.
So validating. And that's where her concept of complicated grace comes in.
Complicated grace. Okay. Tell me more about that.
So it's this idea that forgiveness, it's not about instant perfection, or pretending everything is fine.
It's messy, right?
It is. It's about extending grace to yourself and to others, even when it's hard.
Even when you don't understand.
Even when you feel like the other person doesn't deserve it.
Ugh, yes. That's so freeing, though. Because it means it's not about minimizing what happened.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that forgiveness, it's a journey, not just this destination you arrive at.
It's a process, yeah. And TerKeurst really emphasizes that this journey, it's best traveled with a balance of grace and truth.
Now, when she talks about truth, what does she mean? Because that can sound kind of harsh.
Right, I know what you mean. But truth, in this context, it's not about being judgmental or, punishing yourself or the other person. It's more about facing the reality of what happened.
Okay.
Acknowledging the impact and using that understanding as a foundation for healing.
So it's about honesty.
Yeah, honesty. But
Yep.
she often pulls from Scripture, uses it as a guide to help you process that truth in a healthy way.
So being honest about the hurt, but also finding some grounding, some perspective.
Exactly, because if you try to deny it or minimize it, well, it's just going to fester.
It can come back up, yeah.
And that's where that gray table comes in handy again. It's that safe space where you can hold both the grace and the truth at the same time.
I like that.
You can work through those emotions, wrestle with those tough questions, and ultimately find a path towards healing.
And speaking of healing, one of the things that really resonated with me in the book was this emphasis on God's compassion. Like, she constantly reminds us that God gets it.
He gets it.
He knows how we're wired, and he's right there with us, walking us through this.
There's a beautiful verse, it's in Psalm 103, that says, He knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust.
Dust, yeah.
It's like this gentle reminder that God sees our frailty, our humanness.
And he still loves us.
And loves us, yes. Not expecting perfection. He just wants us to come to him, honestly.
Little warts and all.
Exactly. And there's another verse that really stuck with me. It's from Psalm 56. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book.
It's such a powerful image, right?
It is.
Like God saying, I see your pain. I'm not turning away. Every tear matters.
Every single one.
And that's so important when we're talking about forgiveness, because it can be such a lonely process. But to know God's there, he understands. That can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And that actually leads us perfectly into the practical application of all this.
Because it can't just be theory, right?
Right. It's got to be real life.
You've got to be able to actually do something with this.
And that's what sets this book apart. It's not just concepts. It's packed with exercises, declarations, things you can use to actually start that journey of forgiveness.
Give me an example.
Well, she talks about how unforgiveness, it's like a roadblock. It stops you from experiencing joy, from moving forward.
It's like you're carrying this weight around.
Yeah, a heavy weight. And it keeps you from engaging with life, from seeing the good.
It's like you're always looking back over your shoulder, stuck in the past.
Exactly. Forgiveness, it allows you to let go of that weight. You can finally turn and face the future, start living again.
And in the study guide that goes with the book, she actually gives specific declarations, things you can say out loud to rewire those negative thoughts.
Love that. Like, what kind of things?
Oh, things like, God has given me everything I need to live for him. Or his grace is sufficient for me.
Those are powerful.
Powerful. Or he is my strength when I don't feel like I can go on. And again, even if you're not a person of faith, that idea of speaking truth to yourself, replacing those negative thoughts,
Is so important.
that's huge for anyone.
Huge. It's not about pretending everything's okay. It's about acknowledging the hurt, working through it, and choosing to release that bitterness, that resentment that's holding you captive.
It's a choice, isn't it?
It is. And it's a process, not a light switch you just flip.
Some days it'll be easier than others.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And there will be times when those old hurts, they resurface. And you have to choose forgiveness all over again.
And that's okay.
It is. What matters is that you recognize God doesn't demand instant perfection.
Yeah, there's grace.
Grace, yes. You can come to him honestly. Just like the Father in Mark 9:24, he cries out, I believe. Help my unbelief.
Love that. We all have those moments, right?
We do.
The doubts, the struggles, but we keep coming back, keep asking for help, keep choosing to walk that path of forgiveness.
That's what matters. It's a beautiful picture of humility, and honesty
Yeah.
before God. And that's really what TerKeurst is encouraging us to do with forgiveness.
Yeah. So much of what she talks about, it's this internal work, right? This letting go. But what about the external stuff? Like, what if the person who hurt us, they don't want to reconcile? Or they never apologize?
That's where that distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation, it's so crucial.
Right.
And, that's something I've really wrestled with, too, in my own life.
I think that's why this book hits home for so many people. It deals with those tough questions. So tell me about your experience.
Well, there was this situation in my family, actually. Someone really betrayed my trust. And for the longest time, I just held on to all this anger, this resentment. Like, I thought forgiving them meant I was saying what they did was okay, or that I had to let them back into my life, no consequences.
It's easy to fall into that trap. I think a lot of us have been there.
We have, but reading TerKeurst's book, it helped me see forgiveness, it's about releasing the power that offense has over me.
Right.
It's not about pretending it didn't happen or minimizing the hurt. It's about choosing to let go of the bitterness, the resentment that was eating me up inside, whether or not that other person ever changed.
So how did that play out for you in your situation?
It was a process, a long one, lots of prayer, journaling, talking to a therapist. But I finally got to a place where I could choose to forgive that person. And not for their sake, but for mine. And honestly, it was like this huge weight lifted.
Wow. That's powerful. And it speaks to something that TerKeurst says throughout the book. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself.
It really is. It's about reclaiming your peace, moving forward and healing. And, even though that person never apologized, never acknowledged what they did,
Mm-hmm.
I found closure, I found release just through forgiving them.
That's a beautiful testimony to what we're talking about here. And it
Hmm.
brings up a really important point. You don't need that apology to move forward.
You don't. And that can be life-changing for so many people who are just stuck waiting for something that might never come.
Exactly. And TerKeurst is really clear about this too. Forgiveness doesn't equal reconciliation.
All right.
Sometimes, for your own safety, for your own well-being, you have to keep your distance from that person.
You do. It's about setting those boundaries, those healthy boundaries.
Protecting yourself.
Putting your emotional, your spiritual health first.
And she actually gives some guidance on how to navigate those situations, right?
She does.
Like how to set boundaries but still choose to forgive.
Finding that balance between
Yeah.
protecting yourself and extending grace.
Which isn't always easy, especially if it's an ongoing relationship, like with family or in a work situation.
She acknowledges that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough, but she gives practical advice on how to handle it.
Like what?
Well, it's about being assertive,
Okay.
about what you need,
Yeah.
communicating clearly, and not letting yourself be mistreated.
Now, one thing that stood out to me was how she connects forgiveness to like our identity in Christ. It's not just about the past. It's about who we are in God's eyes.
Yeah, that's so profound. She talks about how when we've experienced God's forgiveness, it changes how we see ourselves. We're not defined by those past hurts anymore.
For what other people did to us.
Right. Our identity, it's rooted in God's love, in his acceptance. And that makes it possible to forgive because we're not carrying the weight of those offenses anymore.
Like a weight has been lifted.
Exactly. You can stand tall, you're free, and that freedom, it spills over into how you see other people too.
I can see that.
When you understand the depth of God's grace towards you, it changes your perspective on the people who hurt you. You don't excuse what they did, but you can see them with more compassion, more understanding.
That's huge.
It is. It helps you break free from that cycle of bitterness and resentment.
Right.
You're choosing to see their humanity, even when they acted in such an inhuman way.
That's a tough shift.
It is. But it's freeing. It allows you to let go of that grip that the offense has on you, and you can move forward with more peace, more purpose.
And that brings us to a question that comes up a lot with forgiveness.
What's that?
Trust.
Yeah.
Does forgiving someone mean you have to trust them again?
Great question.
Yeah.
And TerKeurst tackles it head on. She's very clear that forgiveness and trust, two different things.
Which is so important because it's easy to feel like, oh, I forgave them, now I have to trust them.
Right, like it's automatic. But she points out trust, it has to be earned. You can't just give it away, especially not after someone's broken it.
It makes sense.
It does. It allows you to set those healthy boundaries. Even if you forgive, it doesn't mean you have to put yourself back in a position to be hurt again.
Right.
It's about being wise, being discerning, using your judgment, figuring out if that person is trustworthy.
And sometimes, even if you can forgive, trust just isn't possible.
And that's okay.
It is. It's
Yeah.
about putting your safety first, your well-being. And sometimes that means keeping a distance, even if you've forgiven them.
And that's a hard decision to make, especially if it's someone you love, someone you're close to. But it's important to remember setting boundaries. It's not unloving.
No.
It's self-care. And sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the other person.
Now, speaking of love and care, TerKeurst also talks about the need to forgive ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. That's just as crucial as forgiving others.
Yeah. It's easy to be so hard on ourselves, to hold on to guilt and shame.
We do.
And those feelings, they can be just as damaging as holding unforgiveness towards someone else.
It's true.
It's like we're carrying this weight of self-condemnation, and it blocks us from really experiencing God's grace, his forgiveness.
And TerKeurst reminds us, God's forgiveness, it's available no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
No sin is too big. No mistake is too small. His grace covers it all.
There's that verse, 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just, and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness.
Powerful.
It is. God's mercy, it's limitless,
Yeah.
and we can always go to him
Always.
for forgiveness, for healing.
Yeah.
And it's not just about receiving that forgiveness, it's about extending it to ourselves.
Yes.
We have to let go of the guilt, the shame, acknowledge those mistakes, yeah, but choose to move forward
In freedom.
in freedom.
Yeah.
And sometimes forgiving ourselves means making things right with others.
Making amends.
Yeah, owning the ways we've hurt them.
That can be tough.
It can, but it's an important part of healing, of restoration.
It is. It's acknowledging the impact of what you did and taking steps to fix it. And it's about extending grace to that other person, too. Realizing they're human, they make mistakes.
You're creating a space for reconciliation, for healing to happen.
Exactly. And sometimes that reconciliation might not be possible, or it might take time.
It might. But even if the other person isn't ready, we can still find peace, find freedom by forgiving ourselves.
That's so important. It's a reminder that forgiveness, it starts within.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your own healing, your own wholeness. It doesn't depend on anyone else.
And she has this exercise for self-forgiveness where you write a letter to your younger self.
Oh, I love that. It's like offering compassion to that part of you that made the mistake.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that you were doing the best you could with what you knew back then.
Letting go of the judgment, the shame, giving yourself that same grace you'd give someone else.
Exactly. Breaking free from that prison of self-condemnation and stepping into the freedom of God's forgiveness.
It's a message I think we all need to hear. We're so quick to criticize ourselves.
Yeah.
But God's love, it's unconditional.
Unconditional. His grace is always there.
So let's talk about how all of this impacts our relationships with others.
Well, TerKeurst talks about how forgiveness, it creates this more peaceful, more harmonious environment.
Okay, yeah.
When you let go of that bitterness, that resentment, it makes space for love, for compassion to grow.
Like you're clearing out the clutter.
You are clearing out the clutter to make room for something beautiful.
And it sets a powerful example for the people around us too.
Especially kids.
Especially kids. When they see us choosing to forgive, it teaches them how to handle hurt, how to handle conflict in a healthy way.
Creates a culture of grace, of understanding in our families, in our communities.
And when you're not carrying that weight of unforgiveness, you can be more present in your relationships.
Absolutely. It's like all that bitterness or resentment, it's baggage, it weighs you down, stopped you from being your best self.
But when you choose to forgive, you drop that baggage and you can move forward with lightness, with joy, and that spills over into everything.
It does. It makes your relationships richer, more fulfilling.
And forgiveness can even open the door for reconciliation.
It can. Doesn't guarantee it, but it creates a better environment for healing, for restoring those relationships.
Like when you forgive, it takes some of the sting out of the offense.
Right.
The other person's more likely to be open to reconciliation.
It's not about minimizing what happened. It's about creating a space where healing can begin.
And she's clear. Reconciliation isn't always possible. And sometimes it's not safe. It's not healthy.
It's not. But even then, forgiveness, it lets you find peace. You find freedom. No matter what the other person does, you're letting go of the hurt for you.
Yeah.
So you can be whole.
And she talks about self-forgiveness here too, right?
Yes. So important. You've got to extend grace to yourself in the process.
Because we all mess up.
We do.
We all need grace. It's about being willing to forgive yourself for the ways you contributed to the conflict, and then extending that same grace to the other person.
Exactly. Healing, restoration, it's a two-way street. It takes humility. It takes compassion from both sides.
One of the things I found so inspiring is how TerKeurst weaves in this theme of hope through the whole book.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about acknowledging the pain, the struggle of forgiveness. It's about pointing us to healing, to redemption, through God's grace.
It's about remembering, even in those dark places, there's always hope.
And she talks about the power of forgiveness to transform not just individuals, but families, communities.
The world.
The world.
It's like when we choose to forgive, it creates this ripple effect of healing, of reconciliation. That can impact generations.
Wow.
It's a reminder that our choices matter. That even in the midst of all the brokenness, all the pain, we have the power to choose love, to choose forgiveness. And that's such a powerful message. It's a call to action, to be part of the solution, to be agents of healing, of reconciliation in a world that desperately needs it.
And it all starts with that one choice: to forgive,
Yeah.
to let go of the hurt, the bitterness,
Yeah.
to embrace the freedom God offers.
It's a beautiful vision, isn't it? That we can be part of something bigger, something better, bringing more love into the world, less pain.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us perfectly into the last part of our deep dive. We want to give our listeners some tools, some resources to help them on their own forgiveness journeys.
Yeah, some practical takeaways, things they can actually use.
So, TerKeurst, she talks a lot about the importance of making space for reflection, for prayer. She even gives you specific prayers, declarations in the book to help you process your hurt, invite God into those wounds.
Love those prayers. They're so powerful.
They are. They really help you think differently, shift your focus away from the pain towards healing.
Yeah.
And she also talks about journaling, getting all those thoughts, those feelings down on paper.
Oh, yeah. Journaling's huge.
It is, because then you can start to make sense of them.
It's like untangling those knots.
Right. Those knots in your heart.
Making space for peace, for clarity.
And she also encourages people to find a supportive community.
Community, yeah. That's so important.
It is. Whether it's a small group at church, a therapist, a good friend, a mentor, having that safe space to talk, to get encouragement, it's invaluable.
It's like having your own cheerleading squad.
It is, reminding you you're not alone, and you have people who care, who want to see you thrive.
And that can make such a difference because forgiveness can be so lonely.
It can, especially if you're also dealing with shame, guilt, but knowing there are people you can trust who'll walk alongside you.
That changes everything.
It does. And she recommends checking out other resources on forgiveness too, books, podcasts, articles.
There's so much out there.
There is. And finding something that really resonates with you.
Yeah, what speaks to you?
That can be really helpful, like having a whole toolbox.
Toolbox full of resources.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive into forgiving what you can't forget.
I want to leave our listeners with one last thought.
Okay, hit me.
Forgiveness, it's not weak. It takes so much strength, so much courage. It's about breaking free from that cycle of pain, of resentment.
Stepping into freedom, into healing.
That God offers. And if you're struggling, remember, you're not alone. God is with you every step.
Every step.
His grace is enough. His love, it never fails.
That's a truth to hold on to.
It is. So friends, if this conversation has touched you, if you're feeling inspired to dive deeper into forgiveness, I encourage you, check out Lisa TerKeurst's book, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. It's powerful, it's practical, and it can help you experience that freedom, that healing that comes when you let go of the past.
Let go of the past, yeah.
And hey, if you're enjoying these deep dives, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more book summaries and conversations about things that really matter.
We'd love to have you.
We would. So until next time, keep reading, keep learning, keep growing.
And keep forgiving.